Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Miguel Mendez, Marketing Specialist here at Unravel Data. And before we get started, there are three housekeeping reminders that I would like to cover. The first is, throughout the webinar, please drop your questions into the question box, and we'll do our best to answer them live or respond via email if we're short on time. If you submit one of the top 10 questions during this event as ranked by one of our fantastic panelists, you'll earn some cool Unravel swag. Additionally, this webinar will be available instantly on demand to listen to at your leisure, so feel free to pause or replay as needed. And lastly, help us improve. Share your feedback on the session by rating this webinar, and let us know if there are any other topics you'd like to hear about. All right, that covers it. So with the reminders out of the way, the floor is all yours.
Welcome to FinOps Camp, Episode 3. I'm Clinton Ford, Director of Product Marketing at Unravel Data, and I'm joined by our guests, Sanjeev Mohan, Principal and Founder at SanjMo, and Chris Santiago, VP of Solutions Engineering at Unravel Data. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So here's a look at today's agenda. We'll begin with an overview of the data observability landscape, and then we will jump into a fireside chat with Sanjeev and Chris to talk about some customer success stories to help you map your FinOps adventure. And then at the end, we'll have some time to answer questions that come in during the conversation. So please enter those in the Q&A window. So organizations are turning data into a competitive advantage through innovative new analytics, BI, and AI, including generative AI. Data observability enables organizations to efficiently build diverse, production-ready data pipelines for downstream use cases such as analytics, BI dashboards, and ML model training. Gartner recently shared a research note to share the 5 types of observations in data observability. So the 5 different types of observations that Gartner described are, first of all, data content, data flow and pipeline, infrastructure and compute, user usage and utilization, and financial allocation. So it's great to see how data observability has now an expanded role and covers all these different kinds of observations. And now it's my pleasure to welcome our guests for a fireside chat. Sanjeev Mohan, Principal and Founder at SanjMo, and Chris Santiago, VP of Solutions Engineering at Unravel Data. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure having done some of these episodes with you and Chris earlier, and now I get an opportunity to talk about some more real-life practical examples.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, let's take a look at a couple here. Let me just jump to the first slide. Equifax. Okay, this is a big name. So, Chris, any experience from your perspective on working with organizations like Equifax and some of the challenges here? Did they sound similar, and how did they overcome those?
Yeah, so I'm sure folks are familiar with what Equifax does, but if not, they're in the business of helping or make real-time decisions for their customers in terms of data. What they'd like to do is really monetize the data for their customers, and the quality of their data is paramount. Just like other organizations, they started their big data journey on-prem with services like Hadoop. And most recently have moved into the GCP landscape and using a variety of services from the Google Cloud.
It's interesting you brought up Equifax as a first example, because Equifax is actually a very interesting case study for me. I had an opportunity to have lunch with the head of the chief data officer. He's also the head of analytics, IT, and Bryson at Gartner's Data and Analytics Summit in March of this year. And he was telling me about the migration of this on-premises massive amounts of on-premises data into Google Cloud, and how after the initial migration took place, they started running into cost issues, and understanding the cost, assessing it, and then finding ways to reduce it has been a culture which has been super well entrenched inside Equifax. And now, if you ask, I asked you point blank, well, some people say that cloud is more expensive than on-premises. He goes, no, absolutely not. It depends how well you've architected it, because it's a different paradigm. If you take your on-prem stuff and move it to the cloud, sure enough, it may be more expensive. But if you architect it to be cloud native, then you start seeing the results.
Absolutely. In fact, we did our customer advisory board meeting back in April of this year with Kumar Menon. And one of the things that he mentioned, one of the biggest challenges for moving in from this on-prem to cloud world is the fact that, you've got folks that know the on-prem way of life, their DevOps, the data science, their data ops folks, and having that transition from on-prem to the cloud was a big challenge for them, right? Because now we're talking about elastic compute, storage that can be infinite, and managing some of these the costs of these these queries in many cases, was one thing. So just because you have folks that know how to do things from an on-prem standpoint, you can't make the big assumption that they know what the best practices are from a cloud standpoint. And that was one of the biggest learnings that they found when they did that transition from on-prem to Google.
Yeah, that FinOps culture is not, I wouldn't say it's intuitive, because we engineers don't think in terms of cost. We just have a job. Our job is to write the data transformation pipeline or write the best SQL query. But the cost, that discipline is something that we are now starting to learn. So what, like in Equifax, for instance, there's a product team, there's an engineering team, there's finance team, there's an infrastructure team, and all of these need to come together and understand what are the cost implications of running these workloads in the cloud. That's something new.
Absolutely. In fact, I think one of the examples that Kumar also had mentioned was the fact that the data science teams initially they loved the cloud. They still love the cloud, but more importantly, you're unlocking potentially infinite compute resources. I mean, you could run the best models, you can take up as many resources as you want, and you can be delivering an innovative product, or maybe it's you're gleaning some additional insights. But when you're not taking into account cost, that obviously doesn't make sense from a financial perspective, because not only do we want to be able to glean some of these insights, but if that means that we need to in some cases run $100,000 queries every single time that this thing is run, well, does that make economical sense? And so that was another learning that I took away from Equifax, is that, hey, it's great that now you have all these infinite resources, but you still have to be mindful of how you're actually using those resources, because at the end of the day, if it doesn't make economical sense, then there's no point in doing it.
So very good point. So Chris, I took away two things from my conversation with Equifax. One is more general, nothing to do with Equifax, but that the revelation I had some years ago when I saw this increase in workloads on the cloud, I realized that cloud is an amazing destination to get started. It is so easy that anyone with a credit card or with a free tier account can quickly jump onto the cloud and start building stuff. So we solve the build problem, that agility of experimentation, no problem. But we kick the can down the road, which is operations. Now this thing the storage is going to cost, and the thing is going to run forever unless somebody knows. In fact, I see so many cases, even I am an example of that, where I wanted to get certified on AWS as a solution architect, and I started experimenting with DNS and IP addresses allocated for me. If I forgot to turn something off, then for months my bill was accumulating. So that whole mentality of making bill cheap has a side effect, which is now you have to really understand the operations and actively clean it up. Otherwise, the cost will be too high. So that's a general observation. But the observation that interesting thing I learned from Equifax was when Equifax moved a lot of their artifacts into the cloud, and they started running into cost overruns, they realized that there are these machine learning models, hundreds of them, that they had not run or touched in a long time, but it came as a parcel of their migration. Now, the interesting thing is that if you've got old queries, old machine learning ML models that have not been trained on new data, then now not only are you incurring cost, but you're incurring risk of some new person discovering, saying, oh, look, there is a customer churn model. I'll just start using it. But that model is outdated. It hasn't been used for 18 months. So having that observability and understanding what is recent, what is running, who's running it, how many people are running it, when was it updated the last time, is a risk mitigation strategy. So it's cost and risk.
Absolutely. I think you would touched on the various departments, right? You've got your finance, you got risk in all intents and purposes, platform team, the developers. I think a lot of times it's also good to understand, like, okay, what do they care about most, right? So developers, we had talked about, like, the data scientists, right? Hey, we've got this infinite compute. I can run these models. Maybe I don't care about cost because, hey, I'm not getting the bill. So, like, SLAs are most important for me, making sure that I'm meeting those SLAs. Then you've got the finance folks that are going to be looking at things from a cost perspective, right? Like, how much is my bill? How can I make sure I have the guardrails that are in place? And are there things that we can do to actually keep, to optimize this? So, and then you got the folks that are looking at overall quality. So the business analysts, making sure that the reports, the dashboards are all on point. Everybody's using the same data set, but if they're not all communicating on each other, I think that's a big disconnect. In fact, that was something that Equifax had also mentioned too, is that, if they were to do this all over again, getting, the top down, hey, we're doing this digital transformation, and this actually is going to, we need to include the finance folks, the engineers, the platform teams, everybody who's touching this technology. Everybody needs to not only be aware of what the wants and needs are from everybody else, but also using the same form of communication, right? Because, the finance folks aren't going to know exactly what Spark is doing or some ML model, but, as long as there's some commonality where they can all kind of speak to each other, then we can really create that culture of accountability between each of the departments.
Yeah, I think it's important for FinOps departments culture to make sure that there is a running meeting, whatever the time frame is, organization can decide that, where all these heads come together and they basically look at the cost and say, this is the cost we've incurred. And yeah, so I think that communication becomes a critical factor in establishing a good FinOps culture.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think just one other point with Equifax, I know that at the end of the day, they're in the business of selling data, their insights, right? To complete the picture is one of the important points that they talked about is this unit cost, right? So if I understand what this takes from an infrastructure standpoint, the resources in order for me to do this, how much time or resources that I use from development all the way up into production, then I can really kind of get that price point, right? Like, this is my true cost. And once we actually get this into production, they provide it out to their customers and their consumers, and they start monetizing this. They can now say, like, hey, this is providing X%, ROI over time, or maybe we may need to, shift resources because, this isn't really, these models aren't really, generating the revenue that we're expecting. And now they can actually have these business decisions in terms of, like, where they need to place their bets on. So I think that just comes part and parcel once you understand things from a FinOps perspective of where your costs are, truly how they are allocated in the organization.
And Chris, can you talk about chargebacks? Do you like what Equifax is doing?
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, it all comes down to just really understanding, higher level, like departments, all the way down to the user level, right? Who's actually, incurring up costs, right? I think, being able to understand at that kind of granularity where you're abstracting things, not just like at a service level to say like, hey, I use this much, my resources in BigQuery, but actually say, hey, this particular user used BigQuery, Dataproc, and over the last 30 days, this is how much cost that they were incurring. That helps truly understand where cost is going. We can start seeing trends from that perspective, but then also if there are remediation factors of like, hey, if there's things that we can do to optimize, we can also glean that from, just understanding how they're using resources today.
Yeah, very nice. So Equifax is doing chargebacks, and yeah, when I talk to CFOs, I find that there's a little bit of angst when it comes to consumption-based pricing, because they don't like to be surprised. It throws away all of the budgeting, forecasting. All of a sudden, you forecasted X amount of dollars and you've already consumed it and you're halfway through the quarter. So then, this whole discussion about what is the right pricing model, should it be subscription-based? But if it is subscription-based and you're paying a fixed price, some people may or may not be using the services. So this whole pricing piece becomes really very interesting because there may be lower cost options, but then the CFO also has to look at the overhead of managing the cost. When a bill comes and the bill is pages and pages long, how do you know who is responsible for which piece of that bill? And what costs can we control internally and what costs we just cannot control? And if we cannot control it, then who should we talk to? You see, so there's a lot of cost allocation and cost refinement steps that these organizations are having to do.
Absolutely. I mean, we see that time and time again. I mean, especially for folks that are moving from that on-prem type of world, right? Because let's face it, when things are on-prem, you're investing upfront from a CapEx standpoint of like, this is how much resources I'm going to, here's my licensing costs, everything, but here's what I can expect. And I'm not going to be surprised because this is what this is what I budgeted for the next X number of years, right? And in this consumption world where, all our cloud friends are in, there's that uncertainty. So yes, I mean, I think that inevitably when folks start their journey at Equifax, more specifically here, is that maybe costs spikes in the beginning of stages may not have that much of an impact because we're not looking at things at scale. But as time goes on and customers and workloads continue to grow, those become even more painful, so to speak, right? So having the right observability, in this case, from a chargeback standpoint, becomes very paramount as you continue your data journey in the cloud.
So yeah, so let's take that even a step further. So now, thank you for getting us on to observability. So away from the problems and into the benefits of observability. So one thing that I was amazed to find out, I think it's a study published by AWS that says 90% of trillions of objects on S3 have been accessed only once. I also saw another statistic that said the average consumption of an EC2 instance is 6%. So 94% is wasted. So now talking about observability, why it becomes so important is because if I can look at my observability stats and I can see the utilization is low, then I can right size it, which means I can now save money right off the bat. In fact, I feel that FinOps companies products should have the easiest advantage of selling the product in this economy, because it's the ROI is right there. If I can observe and I can see that going to a cheaper instance, a smaller instance is going to save me dollars, then the product has paid for itself. So as an analyst, that's my view. What do you think?
No, I mean, I think you're spot on. I think, you know, a lot of organizations that we work with don't even have the basic observability to even understand, you know, what's actually being utilized, not just from that compute side, but also from the storage side. So yes, I think that's just, you know, that's just the beginning. And in fact, I think, you know, when we talk about customer journeys, from specifically from a FinOps perspective, I think that is an angle that you know, customers will try to tackle first from an optimization standpoint of like, okay, we don't need that 64 gig, you know, 64 core machine. Maybe we can do this with the 8 core, 16 gig machine, right?
Right.
You know, I think that you know, there's definitely folks that are doing that. I think also too, just, you know, it also depends too on, you know, the expertise of your developer base, right? Because just because we right size the instance, there could also be further optimizations from a code standpoint as well. And I think that most organizations don't even scratch the surface on that, because they're still trying to tackle just the infrastructure right sizing side of the house. So yeah, I think it's all good points, and very interesting about those stats from Amazon, but it doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, Chris. No, I completely agree with you. You know, instance sizing is something that normally data people don't do it. Infrastructure cloud architects may do it. They actually may even say that not only do we want to right size the instance, but there's a cheaper instance using Graviton or AMD chip, and that'll save us another 15-20%. So that's one thing. But to your point about further optimization, this comes at the data layer. For example, you look at your SQL query, the observability product says, you know, you're doing a lot of full table scans.
Yep.
Why? Could you not use an index? Oh, there's no index. You know, maybe we should create an index, you know, so, you know, creating an index and avoiding full table scan is one of like common things. We've had it for decades now, but but in the cloud, there are always new enhancements and optimizations that are coming out. So having a cloud-based SaaS data observability product that's keeping up with these new partitioning techniques that can constantly help you optimize your queries is what's needed in this rapidly changing cloud AI world we live in.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the things that you had talked about, like full table scans, parallelization, data skew, things of that nature. You know, a lot of folks, especially again at the, you know, even at Equifax, you know, this is a new world. And so there's like new best practices, and some of the best practices that you might have been following from your on-prem side, and try to do that from a cloud perspective, or what more people might call like the lift and shift approach. You know, a lot of times people don't even realize that they're doing, you know, inefficient things, which are incurring, you know, costs that don't need to be incurred, right? So I think, you know, being able to, you know, tackle that from hiring the right experts, but more importantly, if there's, you know, folks that use something like a optimization platform like Unravel that can help, you know, guide those folks, especially the junior folks, of saying like, hey, this is where some of your inefficiencies are. Now we can actually use that as a learning tool. And so, you know, over time, you know, you can get some of your more junior resources to follow the best practices and ultimately up-level them, so that way they can become just as effective as some of the more senior folks on the organization.
Great point. Some of us people who've been doing on-prem, we brought some of our on-prem bad habits into the cloud, but the new cadre of kids who are coming into IT who've only done, you know, cloud-based stuff, so they should come in with that understanding of the cost implications.
Absolutely.
Great. So, Clinton, shall we go to the next use case?
Yeah, excellent discussion. So next use case, Maersk, who was able to harness a lot of the capabilities of data observability for not only their operations, but also their development team. Chris, any perspective here on their use case?
Yeah, so Mark Sears is their CTO. We've had many conversations with Mark over the years with how Unravel can impact Maersk. So for folks that aren't super familiar with Maersk, they are a logistics company, but at the end of the day, they also want to make that sustainability impact, right? So it's not just about just making sure that your packages arrive on time. One of the critical events, I would say, in the logistics industry was COVID, right? Where folks were staying at home and shipping, the whatever they need, became, a big, it helped Maersk from a business standpoint, right? So there was a lot of orders, there was a lot of things that needed to be delivered, and Maersk was happy to take that on. But they also use this opportunity to really capture data points, right? In terms of what's making it onto their ships, how many containers. So and more importantly, let's make sure that we're doing the right things from a logistics standpoint, as well as from an environmental standpoint. One of the challenges that Maersk had faced was that they consider themselves a data company, right? And so what they did was they really staffed up with their data scientists, data engineers. In fact, I believe Mark had mentioned that there were about 6,000 people in the organization from a tech perspective. And when you have that many folks, you're going to have lots of different expertise levels, right? So you're going to have some very senior folks that know things such as Spark from all the way down to the very technical aspects, all the way to folks that this may be their first time using Spark, or maybe have very limited experience and maybe looking up to the senior folks on how to write some of the best ML models there. One of their biggest challenges was just the fact of like, okay, how are we making sure that the code that our data scientists are creating here are not only performant, because I think all developers want to make sure that their code is most performant, driving the right insights, but then also having this cost factor. And in fact, without having proper governance in place, what they found out, or what they soon saw, was an extreme spike in the cost from some of these cloud services like Databricks, for example, and no accountability for the folks that were actually writing this code, right? So, one of the things that they needed really help on was just identifying at scale all of these programs that their data scientists were creating are not only being performant, but they're also being cost effective as well, which wasn't really been on focus in the very beginning. Have you had any discussions, Sanjeev, with some of the folks at Maersk in terms of?
Yeah, I love Mark Sears' clarity. He's very entertaining, very inspiring in his story of what he says. What I found super interesting is that he says that they didn't have time to hire thousands of additional engineers. He got lucky, because if he had the time, he still wouldn't have been able to hire them, because they're so hard to find. So this takes me to this whole era of co-pilots that we live in, and I think Chris, this is where governance, observability becomes so important, because if you're going to rely on something like a co-pilot, you need to know what's going on. So, you don't want to be held liable for, let's say, intellectual property damages because the co-pilot used a piece of code that it was trained on and you had no idea. I saw a demo last week was Google Cloud Next. So I was at the booth of Deutsche Bank and they were showing how much they rely on Copilot these days. Copilots are writing more than 50% of the code worldwide now. That's but it's not just that. They were showing this demo of using Google Cloud's large language model called Cody. And so as an example, if I'm not a very good engineer, developer, and I've been tasked to write a Python code to scrape a website, I can now ask Cody. I can say, write me a Python code that scrapes and then give the name of the URL, the address. So it'll not only write it for me, but it even shows me that, to write this script in Python, I use an open source library called Beautiful Soup, and here is a reference to it. So I now know that, what went into that code. So we are seeing this advancement. And the point that I want to make here is because these LLMs are causing a shift in our underlying architecture, for a company like Maersk, they need to be very fungible with new things that are coming in. So having that observability is extremely important. It's quite possible that in 2 years, our current way of thinking about modern data stack may have evolved into something that consists of things like lang chains that are connecting LLMs from different departments and doing some sort of orchestration. So having proper observability and governance as a baseline is really important to prepare for where our architecture is going to be. And how it's going to look, I have no idea. No one can tell you that because we are so early in this whole generative AI space.
Absolutely. And I think, LLMs are very powerful. And we're also at the early stages, right? From what we're seeing so far, I think Copilot is a very powerful technology out there. It's to really help folks, generate code, right? One of the things that, that can be a challenge though, is it might write the most pristine code. It might follow the best coding refactor or the way you're supposed to write the code. It might make things very elegant, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be performance. So I do think that, as time goes on, I think, technology will get better. But right now, I think a lot of the things that we see with folks that are using LLMs from a development standpoint is, is this actually, even though it might look, flawless and it's following the best, coding practices in terms of how you should be writing your code, but is it actually, making the responsible choices from a performance standpoint? In fact, I think that from Maersk's standpoint, I think, there's definitely more junior resources that can, leverage LLM. But yes, I think that's something that they need to take into account is like, okay, how is this actually going to perform? What we also see from Maersk as well, some of the challenges, and I'm sure some of the other folks here on this webinar probably can attest to, is, you may have some very smart folks that may have been, working with, say, for example, Spark for 10 years plus, and may know all the inner workings for it, right? Not only are they a good resources from an expertise standpoint, but a lot of times there could be some ego that's that can be involved there as well. So I think a lot of times when folks are not necessarily focusing on the performance, but looking at it from a cost perspective, I think that having a conversation with some of the more senior folks that may be somewhat egocentric, that's a hard conversation, because what are you to tell them about how to improve things, right? And so, the truth of the matter is, though, is that nobody has the time to look at every job that that they're responsible for and actually look for all the ways that you can optimize, right? And so there's always room for optimization, even for some of the best jobs. I mean, I've worked with many organizations where a lot of people are surprised by some of the inefficiencies that Unravel may be able to uncover. But yeah, I think that nobody has time to look at all, how code is performed from both their experts and the junior resources. And so why not use technology that's going to have more of a top-down approach to look at everything, and then tell us, hey, let's look at the top 100 that were the most resource wasting jobs, and that's what we may want to focus on with the help of Unravel.
Yeah, I like to say data is a victim of its own success.
Yep.
We have more use cases, we have more data consumers, we have more data sources. Everybody wants to leverage, find some hidden insights that we didn't even know existed. And to your point, you just cannot do it manually anymore. You cannot analyze every single SQL statement. So you need some sort of automation, some guardrails. You need, and with LLMs, it becomes even a bigger challenge, because before LLMs, when we wrote SQL manually or through some application, SQL is a very deterministic thing. It is what it is. There's no second, you won't get a different answer for the same SQL if the data hasn't changed. But LLMs are probabilistic. So now you're putting a probabilistic approach on to trying to find accurate information, and that's not a good. That's why hallucinations happen. Hallucination is not a bug; it's a feature of probability.
Absolutely.
So yeah, go ahead.
No. I was in the Go ahead, finish your.
So I think having some sort of a tool that can assess whether it's a good SQL statement or not is important. This is a reason why LLMs are best used as co-pilots. They're not pilots. We are the pilots. So, or we need some tool to help us figure out if my SQL is so poorly written that it'll run up a $10,000 bill, just because you trusted LLM to write you the code, which it did. The best thing about LLM is it'll give you the answer, whether it has it or not, with utmost confidence.
Yep. One other additional data point too is, we're talking about writing or optimizing SQL, for example, right? In the case of Maersk, they were doing a lot of this stuff in production. And so a lot of times when they would see some issue, obviously production gets the attention, right? Because this is customer facing and this is actually, affecting business. And so, they were in this culture of actually trying to fix some of these things in production, right? Now with they are using Unravel, and they're using Unravel's insights for understanding the inefficiencies, areas for optimizations, things in those dimensions. And so what they've done is they've actually started doing this from a development standpoint, right? So what if we were to look at some of these optimizations and apply these best practices earlier in the development cycle? And so once it actually gets to production, if we're actually delivering as high quality of code that's addressing some of the inefficiencies that were caught or that were flagged from a optimization engine like Unravel, then chances are your production issues should go down. And in fact, that's what they've seen. And so they've seen so much efficiencies that were in this approach of addressing some of the stuff from within dev, and not trying to always firefight and prod, that they saw a 20x return of investment from an Unravel standpoint in terms of just cost alone, of just making sure that this was part and parcel of their development lifecycle process.
Yeah, I love this whole shift left concept. And I think data observability has really pushed it. The shift left is not something that we invented. It came from DevOps. But the sooner I can determine an anomaly and fix it, the less will be my cost. The longer I wait and it goes from dev to production, and then things break in production and the CFO finds out, then it starts this whole firefighting, trying to detect where the problem was, is very time consuming. It's very costly, and it makes the entire team unproductive. Instead of being focused on the newest innovation and newest feature, you are literally just trying to analyze where things broke and how much is it going to cost me to fix it. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I think observability's done an amazing job in detecting errors or spikes in cost earlier in the pipeline and mitigating risk. Great. Shall we move to the next?
Love those insights, Sanjeev and Chris. So yeah, DBS Bank, very diverse, decentralized data team and platform. And so their situation was much different. Chris, do you want to share some insights on what you've seen there?
Yeah. So, Luis, had a conversation with Luis, and they're you would think that they're a banking, they're in the banking business, right? So you would think that they would consider themselves a bank, but no, really, they consider themselves a technology company. They do have 50,000 developers, I believe, something, maybe not everybody has that kind of developer workforce, but I mean, they are very open source committed. In fact, I believe 50% of their, the folks working over there are open source committers, right? So it also helps that their CIO is very super technical and, really wants to drive this culture, from a data-driven standpoint. Wants to make sure that this DBS is a data-driven organization. With that, there's a lot of things that they need to manage, right? So they want to be able to provide their user base as many of the resources that are out there, whether it's on-prem, whether it's in AWS, whether it's Google, et cetera, and so forth. But they want to be able to do it in a way where they have some proper governance in place, right? So a lot of things that they do, there's a build versus buy type of kind of discussion, right? Should we use everything that's native from things such as like Databricks or BigQuery, or should we actually build this ourselves? And so they're a unique organization in terms of really trying to be cutting edge and really trying to decouple any kind of like dependency on some of like the cloud vendors. And so, hey, if it means that I can do a combination of services throughout the various services across all of the cloud providers and on-prem, or maybe I build it myself. That's their approach. So very technology driven from that standpoint. With that, I think that also brings up a lot of complexities and challenges, right? Because at the end of the day, we want to be able to understand, should I choose Microsoft's native cloud services over AWS's? There's things that can be very technical in nature. Maybe there's certain libraries or certain services that AWS provides that Microsoft doesn't have, and that could be one reason, right? It could also be a regional thing, right? There could be some regional, like for example, I know they have a lot of Chinese users, right? So there could be some regulatory reasons as to like, hey, it needs to be in a specific region, or you need to use these specific resources. And so the complexity of being able to understand where all of these services are, is one thing. And then the other thing too is they have a lot of very technical resources, but in their situation, not everybody is making sure that all the jobs that they're running are optimal, right? So not necessarily from an SLA standpoint, I'm talking about from a resources standpoint, right? So, just because I'm, throwing a bunch of resources at it to make things more performant, is that the right thing to do? Maybe we should actually look at things more from a coding standpoint. And those are some of the challenges that they brought to Unravel to be able to help solve. And so yeah, I don't want to hog the whole spotlight here, but Sanjeev, have you had how have your conversations been with DBS?
Yeah. So what I love about this episode we are doing is how our conversations have been so different between Equifax and Maersk and our DBS. DBS is unique because 50,000 developers. When I first heard that number, I couldn't even believe my ears. That's a lot of developers for a bank that is massive in Singapore, but it's still regional. It's not, a global. I mean, they're global in some aspects, but based out of Singapore. The other thing that really amazes me is how they're fully multi-cloud. So being multi-cloud is a very tough position to be in. Although most organizations can now say they are multi-cloud, but to pick a product between AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, or maybe even Alibaba, Huawei Cloud, that has a huge set of implications. Cost being a big one as a determining factor, but also you mentioned compliance. All of these things you have to figure out, and DBS has a huge footprint in Asia, so they have to then make sure their data in India complies to upcoming compliance laws, acts that are not even enforced as they're enforced, but they're not really ratified. They're still like in the process of being written. So having that, what that means is that you now need to have an observability tool that spans all of these clouds.
Yep.
So although every cloud provider will provide you their own products, but if you are looking across the board, then you need that ability to have a product that supports multiple destinations. And those destinations, I mentioned some cloud providers, but Oracle Cloud Infrastructure is coming up quite a bit. Hybrid is still very much in place, especially for certain use cases that are so sensitive to compliance, security, privacy, that banks especially are not ready to move them into the cloud. So that to me has been a massive use case for me, looking at what DBS is doing and how they are looking at cost efficiency across different cloud providers.
Yeah, I think DBS is interesting because I think that they're already implementing things that I think a lot of organizations are not there yet, right? Where they truly can be cloud agnostic. So whether Microsoft is best in class here, or AWS, or Google, or even Alibaba in their case, they're doing it, and so that's that's great to see. One other thing to point out too, though, is that it's not necessarily about cost. I mean, it could just be there could be some stacks that are just going to perform a lot better because whatever it may be, right? Maybe that service, depending on the use case, and so I think that is one dimension, as well as just data quality as well. I think that's something that's very important. But they're doing it. But yes, to your point though, because since they are using all these different services out of these cloud stacks, it's always better to use an observability platform that works across all of these clouds, so that way they can really understand, like, hey, if we're trying to solve this from a performance standpoint, what's the most performant out of all the stack, or whether it's from a cost perspective, maybe it's all of the above, right? Quality as well, all of the above. They now have a single pane of glass, so to speak, with Unravel to be able to understand how those dimensions work across the various services, and then really make the best decision across a multitude of services that that they can choose from. Oh, on-prem included as well. And sometimes on-prem can be the better, depending on what the use case is.
Correct. So since we are talking about very, very different use cases, all three of them, for DBS, one more point that I want to make, and this is based on some of the things that you are saying, is that as these stacks become more and more complex, the banks and other large organizations, they all want to reduce cost. One way to reduce cost is to try to go into a more of a unified environment. And that word, which has really taken off this year, is a data fabric. Yep. Last year, we were talking about data mesh. This year, we were talking about data fabric. In fact, Microsoft announced a product not too long ago called Microsoft Fabric. So what is it? It is basically an ETL engine. It is a storage engine. In case of Microsoft, it's Synapse. It is a data governance product. In their case, it's called Purview. But then you've got some sort of semantic layer on top, so the businesses can access it. So sort of bringing these different products together in an integrated manner is a fabric. And with that, you reduce the number of moving parts in your pipeline. And it's easy to observe a fabric than having a tool that needs to have connectors into various different products. And so to some extent, this whole fabric is sort of in response to modern data stack growing so fast that we ended up with thousands of products and getting completely fragmented. So that's the other change that we see in case of banks like DBS, where this is a rise of an integrated, unified platform with observability built in, something called a fabric.
Yeah, I mean, one other thing that that's worked in DBS's favor is with this data fabric approach is that you don't have to be tied to one specific service, right? So if for whatever reason something gets decommissioned, and Luis has some stories on that, it's no problem. We can go ahead and switch that off to the next service that's compatible, right? So yeah. Being agnostic, like I said, I think a lot of organizations are striving to get there, but it's very it's good to see how an organization like DBS, which again is a bank but very technology forward, is actually implementing this today. There is one other point that that I touched on earlier, but I just wanted to expand on. But I think that from a FinOps perspective, one of the challenges that actually I can say this across the other two examples from Maersk and Equifax is that a lot of times we talk about the data scientists and the value that they bring is like bringing these these insights that that they're able to glean from large vast amounts of data has been very powerful and very innovative. But I think the common thing here that we also see too is the fact that data scientists come from a different world. They're coming in from maybe using pandas. Maybe they're not that well versed from a distributed fashion, right, to be able to get that performance. And a lot of times what we see is these data scientists that have great algorithms, but they don't scale well, or they're very expensive because of the way that it was written, because they're not writing for performance, they're writing for for insights, right? And so one of the challenges that at first where they were really looking for Unravel to help with is that, like, how do we school the data scientists to say that, hey, continue to build your innovative products, but you should realize that some of the things you may be doing are inefficient. Maybe it's a particular line of code, or maybe it's a different service, or whatever it may be. And so I think that as organizations are trying to focus in from a FinOps perspective, I think that make sure that some of these innovative ML, or maybe even some LLMs that are being created, you even though they are powerful, you still want to make sure that these things are being resource efficient, because as things scale, this might become cost prohibitive to continue. So one thing to keep in mind, that was one of the lessons learned that Luis from DBS had pointed out.
Very, very cool. Great. Clinton,
Great discussion. This has been fantastic, and love the questions that are coming in from the audience as we share these insights. One thing I want to encourage all of our attendees to do is to learn more about FinOps and learn how it can help you improve your data pipeline performance, ensure data quality, and govern your cloud costs by visiting our Unravel website and download Sanjeev's chapter in this book from our website. So take a look at that. We've also got a lot of questions that have come in, and we don't have time for all of them, but let's see if we can go into just a few of these. So first of all, Sanjeev, for you, can FinOps help me achieve my sustainability goals?
Wow. Okay, I have to say this is the first time the issue of sustainability has come up in a data observability or data FinOps context. And I love the fact that this question is being asked. I strongly believe, as a self-appointed champion of all things data, that data people have a seat on the table. Sustainability has been looked upon as a very hardware-centric thing, data center level, power consumption, water usage, electricity. But I think if we where is the cost coming from? It is coming from the compute on your data, storage of your data, ingress, egress cost of your data. If we can help reduce that, observe it, and help reduce that, we have a strong role to play in the organization's overall sustainability aspects.
Absolutely. And just to add there too, is I think, sometimes organizations that are moving from data center to the cloud, maybe their expectation is that the cloud is going to make, the right choices, but in reality, it's still using hardware. And maybe the code that or the ML model or the LLM model that you're running, has a lot of inefficiencies, and it's doing things that are very inefficient, taking in, unnecessary data that it doesn't need, using a lot of computational resources. In fact, like that EC2 example, right? Where 6% of resources are actually, generally being used, right? You're still paying for those resources to run. So just because you're moving into the cloud doesn't necessarily mean that the data centers in the cloud are actually doing this more resourceful. So there still is responsibility for the organizations themselves to continue to improve and make sure that they're only using the resources that they're requesting, and also making sure that the code that they're actually running is also being optimal, so that they don't have to incur the additional compute and storage resources.
And I want to add one more thing. Sorry, we don't want to take up all the time with just this one question, but one thing that is a very sore point with me, and I may be stating something controversial, but I feel that when we moved from on-prem to the cloud, we left the database administrator behind, or the data architect. So as a result, when somebody said, "Oh, I'm going to go into the cloud and I'm just going to use a DBaaS, Postgres deployment," I know it from my own personal benchmarking, you're going to pay orders of magnitude more by taking an unconfigured or Postgres deployment that comes with its default configuration. You have to know the many configuration aspects to bring your costs down.
Absolutely. Yeah. We can go on and on, but yes. Overall, yes, we can definitely apply FinOps practices for sustainability use cases.
Well, excellent. Thank you both so much for your time, Sanjeev and Chris. We'd like to thank each of you for participating today. And if you haven't already, be sure to watch the previous episodes of this series, and looking forward to helping you map your FinOps adventure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.